elimination to solve the system of equations. The first thing we have to do is make sure that the system is in standard form so that the x values are lined up and the y values are lined up equals the constants. So the x and the y have to be on the same side equals the constant. Then we're going to look at the coefficients to determine which variable are we going to eliminate. Looking at our x values, I have a -6 and a +6. So they are already opposites of each other. So that if I added them together, it would give me 0. That's what we're looking for. If I look at the y values, I have a 5 and a 4. If I add those together, I'm just going to get a number. So it's going to be an elimination of the x variable. Sometimes you're going to have to multiply by a number so that you can get like coefficients. But we do not have to do this step for this problem. So we're going to move over to the third step and just rewrite our equations. -6x plus 5y equals 1. 6x plus 4y equals -10. You are going to add the two equations together. So we're going to add the x values. -6x plus 6x cancels out and eliminates the x variable. Now I'm going to add 5y plus 4y to get 9y. 1 plus -10 equals -9. Our final step is to solve for y by dividing by 9. So y equals -1. We're not done because the solution is a coordinate point x, comma, y. I know my y value is -1, so I can go ahead and plug that part in. But I have to go back and find the x value. So I'm going to go to one of the original problems. You can either use the first equation or the second equation. And you're going to substitute the y value of -1. So I'm going to use the first one. So we get -6x plus 5 times -1 equals 1. Now you just follow order of operations and solve for x. So 5 times -1 gives me a -5. Bring down the -6x. I have to add 5 to both sides to get -6x equals 6. And finally, I'm going to divide by -6, and I get my x value equals -1. So for this problem, the solution is -1, comma, -1. Okay, let's look at another example. This time I have 7x plus 2y equals 24. And we have 8x plus 2y equals 30. So 1, ask yourself if it's in standard form. Are the x values lined up? Are the y values lined up? And are the constants lined up? Yes. So now I'm going to look at my coefficients for the x, which is a 7 and an 8. So they're different. I'm going to look at my y values, and they're both +2. So those are they're not automatically going to cancel out, but they would be easier to cancel out than the 7 and the 8. So this time we're going to eliminate the y value. We are going to have to multiply by something this time because I need to make one of these equations a -2 and one of them has to stay a +2. It does not matter which one you multiply by -1. For ease, we're just going to take the first one and I'm going to multiply it by -1. When I do that, I am multiplying every term by -1 so they become the opposite signs. As long as you do it to both sides of the equation, it stays the same. So -1 times 7x becomes -7x. -1 times 2y becomes -2y. -1 times 24 becomes equals -24. So the only thing I did was took the first equation, multiplied it by a -1 to get opposite signs. The second equation, I'm going to leave the same and just bring it over. 8x plus 2y equals 30. So we multiplied the first equation by -1. Now I can easily see that when I add these together, my y values are going to cancel out. Okay, so we're going to move to that next box so that we have some room. So we have a -7x minus 2y equals -24. We're going to add 8x plus 2y equals 30. So when I add my x's, -7x plus 8x, I get 1x. Because the negative and the positives cancel out, leaving you with 1x. -2y plus 2y eliminates the y values. -24 plus 30 leaves you with a positive 6. Because it's a 1y, you're done solving, I'm sorry, thank you. Because it's a 1x, you're done solving for x. There's nothing else to do. So we already know our x value is going to be 6. Now we can go back and substitute 6 in for x. You can go back to the original first equation, or you go back to the original second equation. It does not matter. Just to keep things the same, I'm going to use the first equation. But it doesn't matter. You could just as easily put it in the second one. Okay, so I'm going to have 7 times my x value of 6 plus 2y equals 24. Remember, I went back to the original problem before we multiplied by -1. What is 7 times 6? 42 plus 2y equals 24. We're going to subtract 42. What is 24 minus 42? Should be a negative. -22, good. Equals 2y. And our last step would be to divide by 2. So y equals -11. All right, for this problem, we have 16x minus 10y equals 10, and -8x minus 6y equals 6. It is in standard form because the x values are lined up, the y values are lined up, and the constants are lined up. But we have to figure out which variable would be easier to eliminate, okay? So you're going to look at the 16 and your -8. Is there any way that you could make -8 a -16? Yes, I could multiply by 2, right? So if I multiply by 2, then this would cancel out. Okay, if I were to do the y values, I would have to make these two numbers 60. Okay, which means I'd have to multiply the first equation by 6, and I'd have to multiply the second equation by 10. So that's an extra step. So in this case, it would be easier to eliminate the x values because I'm only going to have to multiply one of the equations. Okay, so we're going to take the second equation and we're going to multiply by 2. We're going to take the second equation and multiply it by 2. The first one, I'm just going to move over and rewrite it. So that's 16x minus 10y equals 10. Now I'm going to multiply the second equation. I have to multiply everything by 2. So negative 8 times 2, and I'm just going to move it over, is negative 16x. 2 times negative 6 is a negative 12y. And 6 times 2 equals 12. So we took the second equation, multiplied everything by negative 2, so that now I have opposite coefficients for my x variable. Now we're going to add the two equations together. So we get 16x plus negative 16x eliminates the x values. Negative 10 plus negative 12 is a negative 22y. 10 plus 12 equals 22. And we have one last step to solve for y. We're going to divide by negative 22. And so I get y equals negative 1. We're almost done. We have to go back and solve for that x variable. I'm going to solve for x by plugging in negative 1 to the y value. You can either use the first equation or the second equation. I'm going to use the first equation. So we get 16x minus 10 times, instead of writing y, I'm going to put negative 1 equals 10. So we get 16x negative 10 times a negative 1 becomes a positive 10 equals 10. Now I have to subtract 10 from both sides. Notice that that becomes a 0, but you still have to bring down the 16x. And x is going to equal 0. So we're going to divide by 16, and we know anytime we have 0 divided by a number, x is going to equal 0. So our coordinate point is 0, negative 1.